bear cub wedged in a spinning skate rink disco ball and taken to hospital. What this baby did was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The neon lights of Starlight Skating Rink painted everything in electric blues and pinks. Saturday night meant crowds, loud music, and the giant disco ball spinning overhead like a crystal planet. Families filled the wooden benches around the rink's edge, watching their kids glide across the smooth floor. The air smelled like popcorn, and that peculiar mix of floor wax and excitement that only skating rinks could create. Zara Chen sat on a bench near the back exit, gently rocking her 8-month-old daughter Lily in a small stroller. The baby's dark eyes were wide with wonder, watching the colorful lights dance across the ceiling. Lily had been fussy all evening, but something about the movement and music seemed to calm her down. Her tiny fingers reached toward the spinning lights above, making soft cooing sounds that got lost in the music. "She loves the lights," Zara whispered to her husband Marcus, who was lacing up his own skates. "Look how she follows that disco ball with her eyes." Marcus smiled, but his attention was already on the rink. It had been months since they'd had a night out, and he was eager to skate. "Just keep her away from the back door," he said, nodding toward the emergency exit behind them. The staff said they sometimes get curious animals wandering in from the woods. Zara nodded, though she was more focused on Lily's unusual behavior. The baby kept pointing toward the back of the rink, where the maintenance area was located. There was something different about her tonight. She seemed more alert, more aware of her surroundings than usual. Every few minutes, Lily would make a soft whimpering sound and crane her neck to look behind them. The music thumped louder as more skaters joined the floor. A group of teenagers laughed as they tried to skate backwards, and an elderly couple moved gracefully around the rink's edge like they'd been dancing on wheels for decades. It was the kind of normal Saturday night that made you feel like nothing unusual could ever happen. But 20 feet behind Zara's bench, in the maintenance room with its door slightly ajar, something was definitely not normal. A small black bear cub, no bigger than a medium-sized dog, had wandered through the back exit that someone had propped open to let in the cool evening air. The cub's mother was somewhere in the dark woods behind the rink, probably searching for the food scraps that sometimes got thrown out by the snack bar. The cub was drawn by the glittering lights and the strange spinning object it could see through the maintenance room doorway. On the floor of that room sat a spare disco ball, one of the large motorized ones they used during special events. It had been left running after the afternoon setup, spinning slowly on its base, casting tiny rainbow spots across the walls. To a curious bear cub, it looked like the most interesting toy in the world. Lily suddenly let out a sharp cry that made Zara jump. The baby was staring intensely toward the maintenance area, her small hands pressed against the stroller's safety bar. She seemed to be trying to tell her mother something, but all that came out were urgent babbling sounds that didn't mean anything to human ears. "What's wrong, sweetie?" Zara leaned down to check on her daughter. "Are you getting tired?" But Lily wasn't tired. She was trying to warn everyone about what she could somehow sense was about to happen. Babies, some people say, are more connected to the natural world than adults. They can feel things that grown-ups miss, the tension of a coming storm, the presence of wild animals, the moment when something peaceful is about to turn dangerous. The bear cub had found its way to the spinning disco ball. The maintenance room was cluttered with spare equipment, cleaning supplies, and boxes of replacement parts. In the center of the concrete floor, the disco ball sat on its motorized base, spinning at a steady pace. The mirrored squares caught the fluorescent ceiling light and threw tiny sparkles across the gray walls. To the bear cub, It looked like a magical orb that might contain something wonderful inside. The cub approached cautiously, its small black nose twitching as it tried to understand what it was seeing. The spinning motion was hypnotic, and the flashing lights reminded the young animal of fireflies dancing in the summer woods. It had never seen anything like this before. Back in the forest, the most interesting thing it might encounter would be a butterfly or a particularly shiny beetle. This spinning, glittering object was beyond its comprehension. Meanwhile, back in the main rink area, Lily's distress was growing stronger. She began to rock back and forth in her stroller, making soft grunting sounds that were becoming more urgent by the minute. Her tiny fists opened and closed repeatedly, and she kept turning her head toward the maintenance area like she was listening for something only she could hear. Zara noticed her daughter's agitation, but attributed it to overstimulation from the loud music and bright lights. "Maybe we should take her outside for some fresh air," she suggested to Marcus, who was still adjusting his skates. "Give me 5 more minutes," Marcus replied, not really paying attention. "I just want to get a few laps in before we head home." But Lily didn't have 5 minutes to wait. Something inside her 8-month-old mind was screaming that danger was approaching, even though she had no words to express what she was feeling. Her babbling became more frantic, and she began to strain against the stroller's safety straps. In the maintenance room, the bear cub had grown bolder. It stood on its hind legs and placed its front paws on the disco ball's base, trying to get a closer look at the spinning mirrors. The movement caused the ball to wobble slightly, which only made it more interesting to the curious animal. The cub began to bat at the mirrored surface with its paws, the way it might play with a rolling log or a bouncing pine cone. What the cub didn't understand was that this particular disco ball was different from the solid one hanging over the skating rink. This was a special effects model with hinged panels that could open to reveal colored lights inside. The panels were designed to spring open during certain songs, creating a burst of rainbow patterns across the dance floor. But they were also spring-loaded and could snap shut just as quickly. As the cub pawed at the mirrors, one of the panels clicked open. The sudden movement startled the young bear, but instead of backing away, it became even more curious. Here was a mystery that needed solving. The cub pushed its small muzzle closer to investigate the opening, trying to see what was hidden inside the glittering sphere. That's when disaster struck. As the cub pushed forward, 2 more panels sprang open, creating a gap just large enough for a small bear head to fit through. The cub, thinking it had discovered some kind of cave or hollow log, pushed its head inside to explore. But the moment its shoulders passed through the opening, the spring-loaded panels snapped shut around its neck and body. The bear cub was trapped inside the spinning disco ball. Panic set in immediately. The cub thrashed and struggled, trying to back out of the mirrored prison, but the panels held tight. Its movement only made the disco ball spin faster and more erratically. The motorized base, designed to handle the weight of the empty ball, began to strain under the added weight and movement of the trapped animal. Sparks started to fly from the motor housing. The cub's muffled cries of distress were barely audible over the loud music playing in the main rink, but they were just loud enough to reach sensitive ears. Lily suddenly went completely still in her stroller. Her crying stopped, and she tilted her head to one side, listening intently. Then, without warning, she let out a piercing wail that cut through the music like a knife. Every person in the skating rink turned to look at the source of the sound. Zara was mortified, thinking her daughter was having some kind of meltdown. "Lily, what's wrong?" she whispered urgently, trying to calm the baby down. But Lily wasn't having a tantrum. She was sounding an alarm. Her infant brain had somehow connected the distant sounds of distress with the need to get adult attention. She continued to cry, but now she was also pointing repeatedly toward the back of the rink, her small finger aimed directly at the maintenance room door. "She's pointing at something," Zara said to Marcus, who had finally stopped fussing with his skates and was looking concerned. "Babies point at everything," Marcus replied, but he was starting to pay attention too. There was something different about this crying, more urgent, more purposeful than Lily's usual fussing. In the maintenance room, the situation was getting worse by the second. The disco ball's motor was overheating from the strain of the trapped cub's movements, and the smell of burning electronics was starting to fill the small space. The ball itself was spinning wildly now, lurching from side to side as the panicked bear tried to free itself. With each desperate movement, the mirrored panels pressed tighter around the cub's body. The young bear was running out of air, and its struggles were becoming weaker. Fear had taken over completely, and the cub could only think about getting back to its mother, back to the safety of the dark forest where spinning, glittering traps didn't exist. But the forest felt very far away now, and the disco ball was becoming a glittering prison that might soon become a tomb. Back in the main rink, a teenage employee named Jake Peterson was making his rounds, picking up empty soda cups and checking that all the safety equipment was in place. He had worked at Starlight Skating Rink for 2 years and thought he had seen everything. Kids falling down, adults trying to show off and embarrassing themselves, the occasional argument over skating etiquette. But he had never heard a baby cry with the kind of intensity that was currently echoing through the building. Jake glanced over at the family with the screaming infant and felt a twinge of sympathy. Being a parent looked exhausting. But as he watched, he noticed something odd. The baby wasn't just crying, she was pointing. And she was pointing directly at the maintenance room where Jake had been working earlier that evening. That's when Jake remembered something that made his blood run cold. When he had finished setting up the spare disco ball for next weekend's special event, he had left the back door propped open to air out the smell of the cleaning chemicals he had been using. The door that led directly to the woods behind the rink. The woods where, according to the local park rangers, a mother, black bear, and her cubs had been spotted several times in the past month. Jake dropped the empty cups he had been collecting and started walking quickly toward the maintenance room. Something was very wrong, and that baby somehow knew it. As Jake approached the maintenance area, he could hear a strange sound coming from behind the partially closed door, a rhythmic thumping mixed with what sounded like mechanical grinding. The disco ball motor was definitely struggling with something, and there was an acrid smell of overheating electronics drifting into the hallway. Jake pushed open the door and stepped into the maintenance room. What he saw made him freeze in absolute shock. The spare disco ball was spinning violently on its base, lurching back and forth like a washing machine with an unbalanced load. But worse than that, he could see patches of dark fur pressed against the mirrored panels from the inside, and he could hear the muffled, desperate cries of a trapped animal. "Oh my God," Jake whispered, his hand instinctively reaching for his phone. But before he could dial anyone, he heard something that made his blood turn to ice, a deep, rumbling growl coming from somewhere behind him. Jake turned slowly and found himself face to face with an adult black bear standing in the open doorway. The mother bear was massive, easily 3 times the size of her trapped cub, and her small dark eyes were fixed on the spinning disco ball where her baby was trapped. She had followed the sounds of distress through the woods and into the building, and now she was standing between Jake and the only exit from the room. The mother bear's ears were pinned back against her head, and her lips were pulled back to show sharp white teeth. Every muscle in her powerful body was tense with protective fury. She had found her missing cub, but she couldn't understand what had happened to it or how to help. All she knew was that her baby was in danger, and there was a human standing nearby. Jake had grown up in these mountains and knew enough about bears to understand that he was in serious trouble. A mother bear protecting her young was one of the most dangerous animals in North America. But he also knew that running would only trigger her chase instinct. He stood perfectly still, barely breathing, while his mind raced to find a solution. Back in the main skating rink, Lily's crying had attracted more attention than just her parents. Several other families had gathered around the stroller, trying to figure out what was wrong with the baby. An elderly woman named Rose Martinez, who had been a nurse for 40 years before retiring, knelt down beside the stroller and studied Lily's behavior carefully. "This isn't normal crying," Rose told Zara with concern in her voice. "She's trying to communicate something specific. Look at how she keeps pointing in the same direction." Zara followed her daughter's pointing finger toward the back of the rink. "There's nothing back there except the maintenance room and the emergency exit." "Maybe that's the point," Rose said quietly. "Sometimes children sense things that adults miss. My grandmother always said babies and animals know when something's wrong before the rest of us do." Marcus was getting frustrated with the whole situation. "She's 8 months old," he said. "She doesn't sense anything except hunger and tiredness. Can we please just take her outside and see if some fresh air helps?" But before anyone could move, they heard a sound that made everyone in the skating rink go completely silent. It was a roar, deep, primal, and unmistakably coming from somewhere inside the building. The music seemed to fade into the background as every person in the rink turned to look toward the back of the building where the sound had come from. "Was that?" someone whispered. "That sounded like a bear," another voice said, and suddenly parents were gathering their children closer, and skaters were gliding quickly toward the main exit. In the maintenance room, the situation was spiraling out of control. The mother bear had taken a step closer to Jake, and he could smell her wild, musky scent. Behind him, the disco ball continued its frantic spinning, and he could hear the trapped cub's breathing becoming more labored. The motor was smoking now, and Jake realized that if it caught fire, everyone in the room, human and bear alike, would be in even more danger. "Easy, Mama," Jake whispered, keeping his voice as calm as possible. "I want to help your baby too." The mother bear tilted her head slightly, as if she could understand his tone if not his words. Bears were intelligent animals, and she could sense that this particular human wasn't acting aggressively, but her cub was still trapped, and she still didn't understand what was happening. Jake slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Moving very carefully, he managed to dial 911 without taking his eyes off the bear. When the dispatcher answered, Jake spoke in a low, steady voice. "This is Jake Peterson at Starlight Skating Rink on Mountain View Road. We have a bear cub trapped in some equipment, and its mother is here too. We need animal control and the fire department immediately. The equipment is overheating and might catch fire." The dispatcher's voice crackled through the phone. "Did you say a bear? Are you safe?" "For now," Jake replied, watching as the mother bear began to pace back and forth in front of the disco ball. She was making soft woofing sounds, the kind of vocalizations that bears used to communicate with their cubs. She was trying to talk to her baby, to let it know that help was coming. But the trapped cub was growing weaker by the minute. Its struggles had slowed considerably, and Jake could see that the mirrored panels were pressing tighter around its small body with each rotation of the ball. They needed to stop the spinning somehow, but the motor's control switch was on the far side of the room, and getting there would mean moving closer to the protective mother bear. Meanwhile, back in the main rink, word was spreading quickly about the bear situation. The rink manager, a woman named Carol Stevens, had been called from her office and was trying to evacuate the building in an orderly fashion. But several people, including Rose Martinez and Zara Chen, were reluctant to leave. That baby knew something was wrong, Rose insisted, pointing at Lily, who had finally stopped crying but was still staring intently toward the maintenance area. She was trying to warn us. Carol looked skeptical. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but we need to get everyone out of the building before—" She was interrupted by another roar from the back of the building, followed by a mechanical, grinding sound that suggested machinery breaking down. The disco ball motor was failing, and everyone could hear it. "The boy who called 911 is back there," someone said. "Jake Peterson. He's been working here for 2 years." "He's just a kid," Carol said, her face pale with worry. "He's only 19 years old." Zara looked down at Lily, who was now reaching her small hands toward the maintenance area, as if she wanted to crawl in that direction. There was something in her daughter's expression that she had never seen before, a kind of determined urgency that seemed far too mature for an 8-month-old baby. "I think," Zara said slowly, "I think my daughter wants to help." Everyone turned to stare at her. Marcus shook his head immediately. "Absolutely not. We're not taking a baby anywhere near a bear." But Rose Martinez was nodding thoughtfully. "Sometimes," she said, "the youngest among us see solutions that adults miss. Animals respond differently to children than they do to grown-ups. There's something innocent and non-threatening about a baby that even wild animals recognize." "You're talking about putting my daughter in danger," Marcus said, his voice rising. "I'm talking about the possibility that your daughter might be the key to saving both that boy and those bears," Rose replied calmly. In the maintenance room, Jake was running out of options. The disco ball motor was making increasingly alarming sounds, and he could see small flames starting to lick at the base unit. The overheating electronics were about to become a serious fire hazard. The mother bear had noticed the smoke too, and she was becoming more agitated by the minute, pacing in tighter circles and making anxious huffing sounds. The trapped cub had gone ominously quiet. Jake couldn't tell if it had passed out from lack of oxygen or if it was simply too exhausted to struggle anymore. Either way, time was running out for everyone in the room. That's when Jake heard something that surprised him. The sound of voices approaching from the main rink area. But these weren't the voices of firefighters or animal control officers. One of them was definitely a woman, and unless he was mistaken, she was carrying a baby. "Please," he heard the woman saying, "just let us try. She knew something was wrong before any of us did. Maybe she can help." Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. Someone was actually bringing a baby toward a room that contained 2 bears and a fire hazard. But as he listened to the approaching voices, he realized that desperate situations sometimes called for desperate solutions. And if that baby really had some kind of special connection to what was happening, maybe, just maybe, she could help them find a way out of this nightmare. The group approaching the maintenance room was larger than Jake had initially thought. Along with Zara carrying Lily, there was Marcus, reluctantly following behind, Rose Martinez with her medical bag, Carol, the rink manager, and surprisingly, Dr. Elena Vasquez, a veterinarian who had been skating with her own family when the crisis began. Word had spread quickly through the small mountain community, and people were stepping up to help in ways that surprised everyone. "We need to approach this very carefully, Doctor," Vasquez was saying as they gathered in the hallway outside the maintenance room. "Mother bears with cubs can be extremely unpredictable, especially when they perceive a threat to their young." Carol wiped sweat from her forehead despite the cool evening air. "The fire department and animal control are still 15 minutes away. That motor sounds like it's about to explode, and we have a 19-year-old boy trapped in there with a 300-pound bear." Lily had been remarkably quiet during the walk from the main rink to the back of the building. But as they got closer to the maintenance room, she began to make soft cooing sounds. Her small hands were pressed together as if she were praying, and her dark eyes were fixed on the partially open door ahead of them. "She knows they're in there," Zara whispered, bouncing her daughter gently. "Look at how focused she is." Marcus shook his head, still unconvinced. "This is insane. We're talking about exposing our baby to wild animals and a potential fire. What if something goes wrong?" "What if something goes wrong if we don't try?" Rose asked quietly. "That boy in there is somebody's son too. And those bears are just a mother trying to save her baby, same as any of us would do." Dr. Vasquez had been listening to the sounds coming from the maintenance room, the mechanical grinding, the occasional growl from the mother bear, and underneath it all, the increasingly faint cries of the trapped cub. "The situation is deteriorating rapidly," she said. "That cub doesn't have much time left." As if she understood the conversation happening around her, Lily suddenly let out a series of soft, musical sounds that were unlike any baby babbling the adults had ever heard. The sounds were rhythmic and almost melodic, like a lullaby without words. And amazingly, the growling from inside the maintenance room seemed to quiet down in response. Everyone in the hallway went silent, straining to listen. The mother bear had stopped pacing, and Jake's voice could be heard speaking in low, calm tones. Whatever Lily was doing, it seemed to be having an effect on the situation inside the room. "That's incredible, Doctor," Vasquez whispered. "It's like she's communicating with them." Inside the maintenance room, Jake was experiencing something he would never be able to fully explain. The moment the baby's soft sounds had started drifting through the doorway, the mother bear had turned her attention away from him and toward the door. Her aggressive posture had relaxed slightly, and she was making quiet, chuffing sounds in response to what she was hearing. "That's right, Mama," Jake said softly, taking advantage of the bear's momentary distraction to inch slightly closer to the disco ball's control switch. "Someone's trying to help." The disco ball was still spinning frantically, but the motor was clearly dying. Smoke was pouring from the base unit now, and Jake could see actual flames starting to spread to some nearby cardboard boxes. If he didn't shut off the power soon, the whole room could go up in flames. But the mother bear was still blocking his path to the control panel, and despite her momentary calm, she was still a wild animal protecting her young. Jake needed a distraction, and it seemed like the baby outside the door might be providing exactly that. The trapped cub inside the disco ball had heard its mother's calls, and it was trying to respond despite its weakening condition. The mirrored panels had pressed so tightly around its small body that it could barely move, but it managed to let out a few weak cries that were just loud enough for the mother bear to hear. This seemed to galvanize the adult bear into action. She approached the spinning disco ball and began to examine it more closely, trying to understand what had happened to her cub. She sniffed at the mirrored surface and even tried to paw at the panels, but her claws couldn't get a grip on the smooth glass. Jake realized this might be his only chance. While the mother bear was focused on the disco ball, he began to move very slowly toward the wall where the power controls were located. Every step felt like it took forever, and he had to pause whenever the bear glanced in his direction. Outside in the hallway, the group was listening intently to every sound coming from the maintenance room. The fire had clearly started. They could smell smoke and see it beginning to seep under the door. But they could also hear that something was changing in the dynamics between Jake and the bears. "We need to get closer," Zara said suddenly. "Lily wants to see them. I can feel it." Dr. Vasquez looked uncertain. "If we open that door any wider, we could startle the mother bear and make everything worse." But Lily was becoming more insistent. She was reaching toward the door with both hands now, and her soft musical sounds were becoming more urgent. It was as if she could sense that time was running out and she needed to do more to help. "Let me go first," Rose said, surprising everyone. "I've been a nurse for 40 years. I've dealt with frightened animals and frightened people. Sometimes the gentlest approach is the most effective." Before anyone could stop her, Rose stepped forward and very carefully pushed the maintenance room door open just a few more inches. The scene inside was like something from a surreal dream. Smoke and flames spreading across one side of the room. A massive black bear standing next to a wildly spinning disco ball, and a teenage boy frozen near the wall, one hand reaching toward what looked like an electrical panel. "Jake," Rose called softly. "Don't move too quickly. We're here to help." The mother bear's head snapped toward the new voice, but instead of becoming aggressive, she seemed to recognize something non-threatening about the elderly woman's tone. Bears, like many wild animals, could distinguish between different types of human energy, and Rose's calm, nurturing presence didn't trigger the bear's defensive instincts. That's when Zara stepped into view, carrying Lily in her arms. The baby took one look at the scene inside the room and let out a sound that nobody present would ever forget. It wasn't crying or babbling. It was a pure, clear note that seemed to hang in the air like music. The effect on both bears was immediate and dramatic. The mother bear turned fully toward the doorway, her ears pricked forward with curiosity rather than aggression, and from inside the disco ball, the trapped cub responded with a weak but audible cry that was clearly meant for its mother. But the most shocking thing happened next. Lily, despite being only 8 months old and never having encountered a wild animal before, began to struggle in her mother's arms. She was reaching toward the bears with both hands, making soft, encouraging sounds that seemed designed to comfort rather than communicate. "She wants to go to them," Zara said in amazement. "She actually wants to help them." Jake saw his opportunity. While everyone's attention was focused on the baby and the bears, he lunged for the power controls and managed to flip the switch that shut off the disco ball's motor. The spinning stopped abruptly, and the sudden silence in the room was almost deafening. The trapped cub, feeling the terrifying motion finally stop, let out a cry of relief that brought tears to everyone's eyes. The mother bear immediately went to the now stationary disco ball and began examining it more carefully, trying to figure out how to free her baby. But the flames were spreading faster now, and the room was filling with smoke. They had stopped the disco ball, but they still needed to get the cub out of its mirrored prison and get everyone, human and bear alike, out of the burning room. That's when Lily did something that would be talked about in the mountain community for years to come. She looked directly at the mother bear, made a series of soft, reassuring sounds, and then very clearly pointed toward the exit door behind the bear. The mother bear followed the baby's gesture and seemed to understand. She looked at her trapped cub, then at the approaching flames, then at the humans in the doorway. For a moment that stretched like eternity, 2 mothers, one human, one bear, looked into each other's eyes and recognized their shared need to protect their young. Then the mother bear did something that defied everything the humans thought they knew about wild animal behavior. She stepped aside, clearing the path between Jake and the disco ball, and made a soft whuffing sound that seemed to say, "Help my baby." Jake didn't waste a second. He rushed to the disco ball and began examining the spring-loaded panels, looking for a release mechanism. Dr. Vasquez joined him, her veterinary training helping her understand how the panels might have closed around the cub. "Here," she said, pointing to a small lever hidden behind one of the mirrors. "This should release the safety locks." As Jake worked to free the cub, Rose noticed something alarming. The fire had reached some chemical containers on the far side of the room, and the smoke was becoming toxic. "We need to get everyone out of here now," she said urgently. But they couldn't leave without the cub. Jake and Dr. Vasquez worked frantically with the panel mechanisms while the mother bear watched anxiously, and Lily continued to make her soft, encouraging sounds from the doorway. Finally, with a click that sounded like the most beautiful music in the world, the panels sprang open, and the little bear cub tumbled out onto the floor. It was alive, but barely conscious, its small body limp from exhaustion and oxygen deprivation. The mother bear rushed to her cub and began nuzzling it gently, making soft maternal sounds. But the baby bear wasn't responding the way it should. Its breathing was shallow, and it wasn't trying to stand up. That's when Lily surprised everyone one more time. She began to cry, not the frustrated crying she had done earlier, but a different kind of sound altogether. It was a cry of empathy, of shared sorrow for another baby in distress. And somehow, that sound reached the unconscious bear cub. Its tiny eyes fluttered open, and it made a weak but audible sound in response to Lily's call. The two babies, one human, one bear, had formed a connection that transcended species, and in that moment, everyone in the room understood that they were witnessing something truly extraordinary. But their amazement was cut short by the growing danger around them. The fire had spread to 3 different areas of the maintenance room, and the toxic smoke was becoming thicker by the minute. Dr. Vasquez quickly assessed the bear cub's condition while Jake helped clear a path toward the exit. The cub is in shock and probably has some internal injuries from being compressed, Dr. Vasquez reported, her voice tight with concern. We need to get it to an animal hospital immediately, but I don't think it can walk on its own. The mother bear seemed to understand the urgency of the situation. She gently picked up her cub by the scruff of its neck, the way mother bears transport their young, but the baby was too weak to help support its own weight. Every few steps, the mother had to stop and readjust her grip, and it was clear that carrying the injured cub while navigating through smoke and flames would be nearly impossible. That's when something unexpected happened. Lily, still in her mother's arms, began to make a new sound, a rhythmic humming that seemed to match the mother bear's breathing pattern. As she hummed, she extended her small hands toward the struggling bears, her fingers opening and closing as if she were trying to physically pull them toward safety. She's trying to guide them, Zara whispered in amazement. Look at how she's moving her hands. Rose nodded, her experienced eyes taking in every detail of the baby's behavior. In all my years as a nurse, I've seen some remarkable things, but nothing like this. It's as if she understands that the bears need help navigating through the smoke. Jake had reached the exit door and was trying to prop it open wider to create a clearer escape route. But as he worked, he noticed something alarming in the parking lot beyond. Red and blue flashing lights were approaching fast. The fire department and animal control were finally arriving. Normally, that would be great news, but Jake realized that the sudden appearance of sirens, bright lights, and uniformed officials might panic the already stressed mother bear. We have a problem, Jake called back to the others. Emergency services are pulling up outside. If that mother bear gets spooked by all the commotion and tries to run back into the burning building, Dr. Vasquez understood immediately. A frightened bear with an injured cub could become completely unpredictable. We need to get them out of here before the officials take over the situation. But the mother bear was struggling more with each step. The cub was getting heavier as it became more limp, and the smoke was affecting the adult bear's breathing as well. She stopped about halfway between the disco ball and the exit door, setting her cub down gently and looking around as if trying to decide what to do next. Outside, car doors were slamming, and voices were shouting instructions. The emergency responders were setting up their equipment, probably planning to rush into the building with full protective gear and tranquilizer guns. It was standard protocol for dealing with wild animals in an emergency situation, but it was exactly the wrong approach for this delicate rescue operation. Carol, the rink manager, realized she needed to intercept the emergency teams before they made the situation worse. "I'll go talk to them," she said. "Try to explain what's happening and ask them to hold back for a few more minutes." But as Carol started toward the parking lot, Lily began to make distressed sounds again. She was looking directly at the mother bear and her cub, and tears were starting to form in her dark eyes. It was as if she could sense that time was running out and that the approaching officials might disrupt the fragile trust that had been building between the humans and the bears. "Wait," Zara said suddenly. "I think Lily wants to try something else." Before anyone could stop her, Zara stepped fully into the maintenance room, carrying Lily toward the struggling bears. The smoke was thick enough to make everyone's eyes water, and the heat from the multiple fires was becoming intense, but Zara seemed determined to follow her daughter's lead. "Zara, no!" Marcus shouted, starting after his wife and daughter. "It's too dangerous." But Lily had extended both her small arms toward the bear cub, and she was making soft, cooing sounds that seemed to cut through the chaos like a lullaby. The mother bear looked up at the approaching humans, and instead of showing aggression, she seemed to be asking for help. Dr. Vasquez made a quick decision. "I'm going to try to carry the cub myself," she announced. "If we can get it to the exit, the mother will follow." She approached the bears slowly, speaking in calm, professional tones. The mother bear watched her carefully but didn't interfere as Dr. Vasquez gently examined the injured cub. The little bear was barely conscious, its breathing shallow and its small body frighteningly limp. "I can carry it, Doctor," Vasquez said, "but I'll need help getting through the smoke. I can't see well enough to navigate safely." That's when Lily did something that left everyone speechless. She twisted in her mother's arms until she was facing the exit door, then she raised one tiny hand and pointed directly toward the clearest path through the smoke and flames. Her pointing was so precise and confident that it was impossible to dismiss as coincidence. "She can see the safest route," Rose said in wonder. "Somehow, that baby can see what we can't." Following Lily's guidance, the group began to move as a unit toward the exit. Dr. Vasquez carried the injured bear cub, speaking softly to it as they walked. The mother bear stayed close beside them, occasionally nuzzling her baby, but trusting the humans to help with the rescue. Jake led the way, using Lily's pointing to avoid the worst of the smoke, while Rose and Marcus helped support anyone who stumbled in the increasingly difficult conditions. As they reached the exit door, they could hear the emergency responders setting up outside. Flashlights were sweeping across the parking lot, and someone with a megaphone was giving instructions about animal containment procedures. "We need to explain the situation before they see the bears," Carol said, having returned from her attempt to communicate with the officials. "They're setting up tranquilizer equipment and talking about sedating any wild animals they encounter." Jake peered through the doorway and saw what looked like a small army of firefighters, paramedics, and animal control officers. They were clearly prepared for a standard emergency response, which meant they would likely treat the bears as dangerous threats rather than a mother and baby who needed medical help. "There has to be another way out," Dr. Vasquez said, still cradling the bear cub. "If they tranquilize this baby in its current condition, the sedative could kill it." That's when they heard something that made everyone's heart sink. The sound of heavy footsteps and official voices approaching the back entrance of the building. The emergency responders had decided to enter through the same door the group was trying to use for their escape. "They're coming in," Jake whispered urgently. "What do we do now?" The mother bear seemed to sense the approaching humans as well. Her ears went back, and she began to make anxious, huffing sounds. After everything they had been through together, The rescue operation was about to be derailed by well-meaning officials who didn't understand the delicate situation they were walking into. But Lily, as if she had been planning for this moment all along, began to make the loudest, most attention-getting sounds she had produced all evening. Her cries were so piercing and insistent that they could be heard clearly over the emergency radio chatter and the sound of approaching boots. "The baby!" someone shouted from outside. "There's a baby in there." The footsteps stopped, and they could hear urgent voices discussing the change in their rescue priorities. Finding an infant in a burning building had just become more important than dealing with wild animals, and that shift in focus might be exactly what the group needed. "Now," Dr. Vasquez whispered, "while they're focused on Lily, we can get the bears out through the side maintenance exit." But as they started to move, Jake realized they had another problem. The side exit led directly into a fenced area where the rink stored their outdoor equipment. If the bears got trapped in that enclosed space with no way back to the forest, they would panic and possibly injure themselves or others. "The fence," Jake said. "We'll need to open the gate to the back trail, or they'll be cornered." Rose looked at the group. Dr. Vasquez carrying an injured bear cub, the anxious mother bear. Zara holding Lily, Marcus trying to help everyone at once. Carol coordinating with the emergency teams, and Jake trying to solve the final obstacles to their escape plan. "We're going to need a miracle," Rose said quietly. As if in response to her words, Lily looked directly at her and smiled, the first real smile she had shown all evening. It was a smile full of confidence and determination, as if the 8-month-old baby knew exactly how this story was going to end. And then, to everyone's amazement, Lily pointed one more time. Not toward an exit or a path through the smoke, but toward something none of the adults had noticed. In the corner of the maintenance room, almost hidden by the smoke and chaos, was a large window that looked out directly onto the forest trail behind the building. The window was low enough to climb through, wide enough for everyone to pass through safely, and it led directly to the path that would take the bears home to their natural habitat. It was perfect, except for one small detail. The window was locked from the inside, and the lock was just out of reach of anyone carrying an injured animal or a baby. "I can reach it," Jake said, but as he moved toward the window, a new sound filled the room. The crackle of flames that had just reached the ceiling directly above them. They were running out of time, and any mistake now could be fatal for everyone in the room. That's when Lily made one final, extraordinary gesture. She looked at each person in the room, one by one, as if she were saying goodbye. Then she made a sound that was unlike anything she had produced all evening. A complex series of musical notes that seemed to carry meaning beyond what any human language could convey. The effect was immediate and profound. The mother bear stopped her anxious pacing and looked directly at Lily with what could only be described as understanding. Dr. Vasquez felt the injured cub in her arms relax and begin to breathe more easily. Jake found himself moving toward the window lock with newfound confidence, as if he knew exactly what needed to be done. And everyone in the room suddenly understood that they were not just witnessing a rescue operation. They were participating in something that would change their understanding of the connections that exist between all living things. Jake reached for the window lock, but as his fingers touched the metal mechanism, he realized it wasn't just locked, it was rusted shut from years of mountain weather. The lock hadn't been opened in so long that it had practically welded itself closed. He pulled and twisted, but the mechanism wouldn't budge. "It's stuck," Jake said, frustration creeping into his voice. Behind them, the flames were spreading faster, and the smoke was becoming so thick that everyone was starting to cough uncontrollably. But as Jake struggled with the lock, something remarkable happened. The mother bear approached the window and began to examine it with her sensitive nose. She could smell the fresh forest air coming through the tiny gaps around the frame, and she could sense that freedom for her cub lay just beyond this barrier. Dr. Vasquez, still holding the injured bear cub, noticed that the little animal was responding to its mother's proximity. The cub's breathing was becoming slightly stronger, and it was making tiny sounds as if trying to communicate with its mother. The bond between the two bears was giving the injured baby the strength to keep fighting. "The cub is stabilizing," Dr. Vasquez reported, though her voice was strained from the smoke. "But we need to get it fresh air and proper medical attention soon, or we'll lose it." Outside the window, they could hear voices calling to each other. The emergency responders had split into teams and were approaching the building from multiple directions. Soon, they would discover the side maintenance area and the group's attempted escape route. That's when Rose had an idea that surprised everyone, including herself. "My late husband was a locksmith," she said, pulling a small toolkit from her nurse's bag. "He always said I should carry these in case of emergencies. I never thought I'd use them to help rescue wild animals from a burning building." As Rose worked on the lock with her husband's old tools, Zara noticed something extraordinary happening with Lily. The baby had become completely calm and was staring intently at the forest beyond the window. Her small hands were pressed against the glass, and she was making soft humming sounds that seemed to be directed at something outside that the adults couldn't see. "What is she looking at?" Zara whispered, following her daughter's gaze into the dark woods. Marcus peered through the window and suddenly gripped his wife's arm. "There," he said, pointing to a spot about 50 yards into the forest. "Do you see that?" At first, Zara couldn't make out what he was pointing at, but as her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she saw them. 2 more bear cubs, smaller than the injured one, sitting quietly at the base of a large pine tree. They were waiting for their mother and sibling to return from what had probably started as a simple search for food. "Oh my God," Dr. Vasquez breathed. "She has other babies. This mother has been trying to get back to her other cubs this whole time." The realization added a new layer of urgency to their rescue mission. The mother bear wasn't just trying to save one cub, she was trying to reunite her entire family. And those other cubs, waiting alone in the forest, were probably getting more frightened and vulnerable with each passing minute. Lily seemed to understand the full situation in a way that amazed all the adults. She began to make more complex sounds, not just the musical humming from before, but a pattern of calls that almost sounded like she was trying to reassure the distant cubs that help was coming. "Is she—" Marcus started to ask, then stopped, unable to finish the question because the answer seemed too incredible to believe. "Is she talking to them?" Zara completed the thought. "I think she is." Rose's locksmith tools were making progress on the rusted mechanism, but it was slow work. Each tiny movement of the lock required careful maneuvering, and the smoke was making it difficult for her to see clearly. Her hands, steady from decades of medical work, were trembling slightly from the stress and the toxic air. "Almost got it," Rose muttered, though everyone could hear the strain in her voice. Jake had been monitoring the approaching emergency responders through the partially open door, and he could see flashlight beams getting closer to their location. "We've got maybe 2 minutes before they find us," he reported. "After that, this whole situation becomes an official emergency response, and we lose control of how it's handled." The mother bear seemed to sense the approaching deadline as well. She began to pace in front of the window, occasionally looking back at Dr. Vasquez and her injured cub, then toward the door where the humans were approaching. Her anxiety was growing, and everyone knew that a stressed mother bear could become dangerous very quickly. But Lily had one more surprise for them. She twisted in her mother's arms until she was facing the mother bear directly. Then she did something that none of them had expected. She reached out with one small hand, as if she wanted to touch the wild animal. "Lily, no," Zara said instinctively, pulling her daughter back. But the mother bear had seen the gesture, and instead of being threatened by it, she seemed to understand that the baby was offering comfort. The massive animal took a step closer to Zara and Lily, close enough that they could feel her warm breath and see the intelligence in her dark eyes. For a moment, that seemed to last forever, the mother bear and Lily looked directly at each other. Then the bear did something that would be remembered by everyone present for the rest of their lives. She gently touched her nose to Lily's outstretched hand. The contact lasted only a second, but the effect was profound. Lily made a sound of pure joy, a laugh that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her. And the mother bear, as if she had received some kind of reassurance from the baby, visibly relaxed and turned back toward the window with renewed patience. "There," Rose said triumphantly. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed as loud as a gunshot in the tense silence of the room. Jake pushed the window open, and cool, clean forest air rushed into the smoke-filled maintenance room. Everyone took deep, grateful breaths, but their relief was short-lived. The sound of the opening window had been heard by the emergency responders outside. "Someone's in the maintenance area," a voice shouted. "We've got movement near the back window." Heavy footsteps began running toward their location, and powerful flashlight beams started sweeping across the forest behind the building. In moments, the entire area would be flooded with official personnel, bright lights, and rescue equipment. Dr. Vasquez quickly assessed the situation. The window was open, but climbing through it while carrying an injured bear cub would be awkward and dangerous. The mother bear was calm for now, but the approaching lights and voices might panic her. And somewhere in the forest beyond, 2 more bear cubs were waiting for their family to return. "We need to move now," Dr. Vasquez said, shifting the injured cub in her arms. "But I'll need help getting through the window safely." Jake positioned himself to assist, but as Dr. Vasquez approached the window, the injured bear cub began to stir more actively. The fresh air was helping to revive it, and it was starting to move in ways that made it harder to carry securely. "It's waking up, Doctor," Vasquez reported. "That's good for its health, but it's going to make transport much more difficult." The mother bear seemed to understand the problem. She approached Dr. Vasquez and made soft vocalizations as if asking for her cub back. But the baby bear was still too weak to travel on its own, and the mother couldn't carry it safely through the window opening. That's when Lily, once again, provided an unexpected solution. She began to make the same musical sounds that had calmed the bears earlier, but this time she was looking directly at the injured cub. Her sounds seemed to have a soothing effect on the young bear, helping it to relax in Dr. Vasquez's arms. "She's keeping it calm," Dr. Vasquez said in amazement. "As long as Lily keeps making those sounds, I think I can handle the cub during the transfer." But they faced a new problem. If Lily was going to help keep the bear cub calm, she would need to go through the window at the same time as Dr. Vasquez and the bears. That meant Zara would have to climb through the window into the dark forest while carrying her 8-month-old daughter. "I can do it," Zara said, reading the situation before anyone else could object. "If Lily can help save those bears, then we're going to help her do it." Marcus started to protest, but the sound of boots on gravel was getting closer, and they could see the first flashlight beams approaching the window from outside. There was no time for family discussions or safety debates. Rose went through the window first, her medical bag slung over her shoulder and her husband's locksmith tools back in her pocket. Despite being the oldest member of the group, she climbed through with surprising agility and immediately began scanning the forest for any sign of the other bear cubs. Jake went next, positioning himself outside to help the others climb through safely. As his feet touched the ground on the forest side of the window, He could hear official voices coming from multiple directions, not just behind them in the maintenance room, but also from the parking lot and the main building entrances. "They're surrounding the whole area," Jake reported quietly. "Once everyone's through, we need to move deeper into the forest quickly." Dr. Vasquez approached the window with the injured bear cub, while Lily continued her soft musical sounds. The combination of the baby's calming influence and the fresh forest air was helping the young bear to breathe more easily, but it was still clearly in need of medical attention. The transfer through the window was awkward and tense. Dr. Vasquez had to hold the bear cub securely while maneuvering through the opening, all while Lily maintained her soothing sounds from Zara's arms. The mother bear watched anxiously from inside the maintenance room, but she seemed to trust that the humans were helping rather than harming her baby. As Dr. Vasquez made it safely through the window with the injured cub, something beautiful happened. The moment the little bear felt the cool forest air and caught the scent of its natural home, it let out a weak but joyful cry that echoed through the trees. From somewhere in the darkness ahead, 2 answering calls came back. The other cubs had heard their sibling and were calling out in response. Zara climbed through next, still carrying Lily, who had never stopped her musical sounds. As soon as the baby felt the forest air on her face, her humming became even more melodic, as if she were singing a lullaby to the entire woodland around them. The mother bear came through the window last, and the moment her paws touched the forest floor, she rushed to Dr. Vasquez and her injured cub. But instead of taking the baby away immediately, she looked back toward the humans with what could only be described as gratitude. Her dark eyes seemed to be saying thank you in a language that transcended words. Jake quickly closed the window behind them just as flashlight beams appeared in the maintenance room they had escaped from. They could hear voices shouting about the fire and searching for survivors, but the emergency responders hadn't yet realized that the survivors had already made it safely outside. Dr. Vasquez gently placed the injured bear cub on the soft forest floor, where it was immediately surrounded by its mother's protective presence. The little bear was still weak, but it was breathing normally now and trying to lift its head to look around. "It's going to be okay, Doctor," Vasquez whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "The fresh air and being back with its mother will help it recover." That's when they heard rustling in the underbrush ahead, and 2 small shapes emerged from behind the pine tree. The other bear cubs had heard their family's calls and were running toward the reunion. They were smaller than their injured sibling, probably born later in the season, and they moved with the bouncing, playful energy of healthy young animals. The mother bear's joy at seeing all her cubs together was unmistakable. She nuzzled each of them in turn, making soft maternal sounds that seemed to be a mixture of relief and celebration. The injured cub, strengthened by the presence of its siblings, managed to sit up and touch noses with its brother and sister. Lily watched this family reunion with wide, wondering eyes. Her musical sounds had gradually faded to a contented humming, as if she knew her job was finished. In her mother's arms, she clapped her small hands together and laughed with pure delight at seeing the bear family whole again. Rose wiped tears from her eyes as she watched the scene. "In 40 years of nursing," she said softly, "I've seen a lot of families reunited, but nothing quite like this." Behind them, they could hear the emergency responders breaking through the maintenance room door, followed by shouts about the fire being contained and searches for any people who might have been trapped inside. But here in the forest, away from the chaos and sirens, there was only peace and the quiet sounds of a wild family being whole again. The mother bear looked one more time at the humans who had helped save her cubs, then began to lead her family deeper into the forest. The injured cub was walking now, slowly but steadily, supported by its mother on one side and nudged along by its excited siblings. But before they disappeared into the darkness, something extraordinary happened one final time. The injured bear cub turned back toward the humans and made a soft sound, not a cry of distress this time, but something that sounded remarkably like gratitude. And Lily, as if she understood perfectly, made a gentle cooing sound in response. It was a conversation between two babies who had shared an experience that neither of them would ever forget, even if they could never fully understand what had happened between them. As the bear family disappeared into the forest, Jake turned to the others with a smile. "Well," he said, "that's definitely not going in my employee handbook." Everyone laughed, but it was the kind of laughter that comes after witnessing something miraculous, soft and full of wonder rather than simple amusement. They made their way back toward the skating rink's parking lot, where they would have to explain to the emergency responders how they had ended up in the forest with no injuries and no bears in sight. It would be a complicated story to tell, and they all knew that some parts of it would sound too incredible to believe. But as they walked through the trees, with Lily babbling contentedly in her mother's arms and the night air clear and cool around them, they realized that the most important parts of the story weren't the ones that could be easily explained. The most important part was that a baby's extraordinary intuition had brought together a group of strangers who had worked as a team to save a wild family in crisis. "She knew," Zara said, looking down at her daughter with new respect. Somehow, Lily knew exactly what needed to happen. Marcus nodded, his earlier skepticism completely gone. "I still don't understand how an 8-month-old baby could coordinate a rescue operation, but I can't argue with the results." Dr. Vasquez was already thinking about the report she would have to write for the state wildlife department. "They're going to ask me how we managed to help an injured bear cub without anyone getting hurt. I'm not sure I have an answer that will satisfy them." "Tell them the truth," Rose suggested. "Tell them that sometimes the most unexpected solutions come from the most unexpected sources." As they reached the edge of the parking lot, they could see the emergency responders packing up their equipment. The fire had been extinguished, the building had been searched, and no injured people or dangerous animals had been found. From the officials' perspective, it had been a successful response to what turned out to be a relatively minor incident. But the 6 people walking out of the forest knew that they had been part of something much more significant than a minor incident. They had witnessed the power of compassion to cross the boundaries between species, and they had seen how even the smallest person could make the biggest difference when guided by love and intuition. Lily, secure in her mother's arms, looked back one more time toward the dark forest where her new friends had disappeared. She couldn't see them anymore, but somehow she knew they were safe and happy and together. And that knowledge filled her with a contentment that would last far beyond this extraordinary night. In the days that followed, the story of what happened at Starlight's skating rink would be told and retold throughout the mountain community. Some people would focus on the dramatic rescue aspects, the fire, the trapped animal, the brave actions of the people involved. Others would emphasize the remarkable intelligence of the bears and their ability to trust humans in a crisis. But those who had been there that night knew that the real story was about something much more profound. It was about the mysterious connections that exist between all living things, and about how love and compassion can create bridges between worlds that seem completely separate. And every time Lily heard her parents telling the story to friends and neighbors, she would smile and clap her hands, as if she remembered every detail of that magical night when she helped save a bear family and discovered that the language of kindness is understood by every creature under the stars. Years later, when Lily was old enough to walk in the forest behind her house, she would sometimes find small paw prints on the trail. Prints that were too small to belong to adult bears, but too large to belong to most other animals. And whenever she saw those prints, she would stop and listen carefully to the sounds of the forest, as if she were hoping to hear familiar voices calling back to her from the trees. Because some connections, once made, are never truly broken, and some friendships, however brief and however unlikely, leave marks on the heart that last forever. The disco ball that had started it all was quietly retired from service at Starlight's skating rink. But the memory of that night continued to spin in the hearts and minds of everyone who had been part of the miracle, casting reflections of wonder and hope that would shine for the rest of their lives.